Well, to discuss all things budget, I'm now joined by Sizwe Nxedlana, Chief Economist at FNB, and Andrew Wellstead, Head of Tax at Norton Rose. Great to have you with us, both gentlemen.
Good evening.
Sizwe, let me start with you. We always say it is going to be really tough this year. Is it going to be even harder this year because of this pressure to increase spending and not much coming in?
Well, I think it will be tougher. The economy has underperformed expectations from last year's budget review quite significantly. What we have seen is that there's been a strong drive by the Treasury to try and consolidate expenditure. I think in last year's medium-term budget policy statement, it was the first time in some 14 years where non-interest expenditure wasn't added to. So we're seeing increasing evidence of an attempt to moderate spending. And I think that if you look at the first 9 months of the fiscal year, we also seem to be hitting the revenue targets that were put forward during the MTP.
Very quickly, will he stick to that and say we're not going to increase our allocations? The money is just not there. We are going to keep the ship steady.
Look, the principle that fiscal policy is run on is counter-cyclicality. We were told 4 years ago that we would receive support from the Treasury. They did exactly that. They accelerated spending. We've been told for the last 2 years that they've bought us time to heal. They're going to start pulling back, and we've seen evidence, more and more evidence that consolidation in terms of expenditure there's a massive attempt to try and achieve.
Your expectations regarding tax, let's start with personal tax, the one that everybody worries about.
Yeah, obviously the question of rates increases are close to everybody's heart. Let's bear in mind that this is an election year, and in the background we've also got the Davis Tax Review Committee, which was announced last year and formed and has already begun its review process. We don't expect any significant tax rate increases other than adjustments for bracket creep, which happens every year.
And what about the top brackets? Could he not move in there?
I think you've heard a lot, I've certainly heard a lot driving around on the radio and in the press about the small tax base, but it's true. We do have a very small tax base in South Africa that is underpinning the spend that the fisc undertakes. And that tax base is under pressure. There's really very little room to maneuver. And again, in election year, I think it mitigates against doing anything drastic like that. Maybe next year, depending on results, but I would be surprised to see any adjustments in the income tax rates.
Sizwe, you were saying earlier, talking about this counter-cyclical stance, and Pravin Gordhan has affirmed his right to do that, to take on more debt in recent years. But we're heading to 45% of GDP. Is this the point at which we stop? We must stop.
Well, it's not going to start tomorrow. I would say probably we started.
He has it at a level of in 2016.
Yes. The primary budget deficit is actually expected to decline to below 1% by the 2016-2017 fiscal year, and I think thereafter it should be in surplus. Now, debt stabilizes when you are living beyond or within your means before you have to start paying down the state debt cost. And when you start having a primary budget surplus, that's when you start having a stabilization in overall debt. All that means is that you are living within your means and you have some powder left over to start paying down debt. So to the extent that the revenue targets are met and we see further evidence of expenditure consolidation, I think we should be plus minus on track to
and
meet
the rating agencies that we worry about endlessly, will they be happy with where we are, where we're going, and the fact that this is now leveling off? We're not going to take on too much debt.
Well, to the extent that what we saw in the medium-term budget policy statement is affirmed tomorrow, I think that we should see the rating agencies stay pat, or at least start to make some encouraging noises about reaffirming or maybe even removing some of those negative watches. Of course, it doesn't only depend on the fiscus, because that's not only what they pointed out to in terms of a deterioration of the fiscal metrics. They also spoke about social unrest. They also spoke about lower GDP growth, and they also spoke about policy uncertainty. And I think that's broader than just the budget.
And some people saying he will probably mention what's happening in the mining sector, adding to what the president said earlier. Andrew, I want to ask you, we're hearing about these new and creative ways that Treasury is trying to get cash, because like you said, it doesn't want to burden South Africans right now, and there is that online tax coming in on the 1st of April. Are there any more creative things that he could look at?
Well, there are. You know, there's the National Health Insurance, which is looming. We expect some clarity as to how that will be funded. But as I say, you know, you've formed a committee like the Davis Tax Review Committee to consider the tax regime in South Africa at quite a high level. They've got a very broad scope that they're looking at. So doing anything knee-jerk to try and raise revenues now would be a little bit alarmist, I think. You may hear something about, you know, green taxes, the new carbon tax, that could add to the coffers. But I think Treasury are a little bit sensitive. There's been a lot of talk from taxpayers and commentators that it's one thing not increasing tax rates, and we think it's a positive thing. There's an argument that you can increase tax rates to a point where it becomes counterproductive, in fact. But the other thing is introducing a whole lot of new taxes. People are wise to it. You can introduce something and call it e-tolls, not a tax, but is it a tax? How are we going to pay for NHI? All of those things are what people are looking for some clarity on in the budget, and what they're hoping for is not new programs or new bespoke taxes that we say is not a tax, but in fact it's burdening the same people.
I want to ask you both, finally, do you get the sense, and we've spoken about this in recent years, that South Africans are becoming increasingly concerned about where the tax money goes? So much goes to education. We don't always see the results. And last year, Pravin Gordhan talking about curbing perks for ministers. Apparently he's received a lot of pushback for that. Do you think this will be something that comes more and more to the fore, starting with you, Andrew?
I believe so. I believe very much so, in fact. The fact of the matter is this, that as I say, you've got a small tax base. The economy is under pressure, which means the taxpayers are under pressure. When you are squeezing them because there's a fiscal deficit and you're trying to narrow that, that's one thing. But people want to see results for that. And I think, the Finance Ministry is one of those ministries that done a superb job. But you could see, as we said, the Minister last year announced a whole range of reforms, no credit cards, no cars, all of these things. And it's been flouted by and large. And as you say, there's been pushback. So people are really looking for bang for their buck now. If we're paying tax and everyone's, there's a morality argument about paying taxes, which the Minister is fond of, no problem. Everyone has to contribute to the fiscus. But we have to start seeing it spent more wisely. We have to see people cracking down on corruption, or you are going to start getting a backlash.
Final word, do you concur?
No, I concur. I think a key theme will be an elimination of waste and corruption that goes hand in hand with trying to tighten the belt and consolidate non-interest expenditure.
All right, thank you both for your time this evening. That was Sizwe Nxedlana from FNB, Chief Economist, and Andrew Wellstead from Norton Rose.